Inflation is not a storm that sweeps everything away. It is a wealth filtration funnel. Look at how those at the top of the financial food chain harvest profits as prices escalate. New York never sleeps, but there is something that stays up even later than this city. It requires no rest, yet it gnaws away at the fruits of your labor every second, every minute. They call it by an elegant name, inflation. Look at a $1 pizza slice in Manhattan, once a lifeline for students and low-income workers. Now the 99 cents or $1 signs are fading away, replaced by prices of $3 or even $5 for a simple slice. You think the price of pizza went up? No, you're wrong. The essence of the pizza slice remains the same. It is only the value of the dollar in your pocket that is dying. Imagine you work hard for 8 hours a day at a midtown office to earn $300. You put that money into a savings account. A year later, it is still that same $300, but it can only buy the amount of goods that previously required only 6 hours of work to afford. Where did those 2 hours of your life go? Who stole those 120 minutes of your sweat and tears? The answer does not lie with the pizza shop nor with the landlord in Brooklyn. It lies within a sophisticated mechanism we call the hidden tax. Inflation is the only tax that does not require a vote from Congress. It is the quietest thief in human history. It doesn't take money directly from your wallet with complex tax receipts. It simply makes the money in your wallet more useless over time. Look deeper into this paradox. Why does inflation exist? Why, from classrooms to Federal Reserve Fed reports, is a 2% inflation rate considered the sacred number for a healthy economy? If 0% inflation brings absolute stability, why didn't the genius minds in Washington choose it? The answer does not lie in good or evil, but in the essence of survival. Imagine a world without inflation where your money retains its value forever. In that case, the motivation for you to take risks, to invest, or to innovate would gradually disappear. Why build a risky business or research a new technology when simply holding cash in your pocket is enough to make you wealthier? From an objective perspective, inflation is the heartbeat of movement. It is the natural mechanism that forces humans to escape a state of inertia. It reminds us that, in this universe, whatever stands still is dying. Governments and economists do not create inflation just to punish the poor. They maintain it as a regulatory tool to ensure that cash flow never stops. The U.S. financial system, with a debt of over $34 trillion, is actually a massive leap of faith in the future. And inflation is the lubricant that prevents that debt machine from rusting, allowing us to borrow tomorrow's resources to build today's world. In other words, inflation is not a policy error. It is a part of the rules of the game, a pre-installed evolutionary pressure. It forces workers in the Bronx to upgrade their skills, compels the middle class to learn how to invest, and pushes corporations to constantly innovate. Inflation forces us to race against time because it understands that too much comfort for too long leads to stagnation. However, this race is by no means fair for everyone. While we are all running to survive, inflation inadvertently creates a massive thrust for those who already hold assets, while creating barriers for those who only have their labor. Inflation is neither good nor bad. It is a natural value-shifting mechanism under slight human intervention. The problem is not that the system is working against you, but whether you have understood its rules to navigate your own cash flow. Inflation is the heartbeat of development, and it is beneficial for social movement. So why are we witnessing a bitter reality that the gap between rich and poor has never been so clear and devastating? Why is it that as the inflation machine operates, the middle class finds itself increasingly distant from the dream of owning a home in Brooklyn, while the wealth of billionaires in Manhattan penthouses skyrockets to unimaginable figures? The answer lies in how inflation chooses whom to prioritize. Inflation is like a wind. If you are a large sail, meaning you own assets, real estate, and stocks, this wind will push you further and faster. But if you are merely rowing by hand, meaning you only have labor and cash, this wind will only exhaust you as you struggle against the rising waves of prices. This is the key point. Inflation stimulates overall growth, but it distributes the fruits of that growth unfairly. It creates a race where everyone's starting line is different. While the system races for natural survival, it is also inadvertently performing a massive transfer of wealth from those who work for money to those who own things that create money. Why does this injustice exist? Is it a flaw in the system, or is it the price we must pay to prevent society from stagnating? In this video, we won't just look at soulless inflation numbers. We will strip away the mask of this perpetual motion engine to see clearly how can a mechanism considered healthy leave millions of workers feeling left behind, and who is truly behind the wheel in this cruel race. Welcome to the naked truth about inflation. Fasten your seatbelt because after this video you will understand that. In the world of inflation, standing still does not mean stability. Standing still means being dispossessed. Don't let the conversation end here. If these insights click with you, follow the channel so we can keep exploring the hidden layers of this financial game together. In case you want to revisit this later, just like the video to save it to your playlist. Follow to stay updated on our next discussions. Let's stay sharp together. To understand why the money in your pocket evaporates, you must stop looking at numbers and start looking at the mechanism. Inflation is not a natural phenomenon like rain or sunshine. It is a product designed in the laboratories of central banks. Most people think that when they deposit $1,000 into a bank on Wall Street, that money sits still in a vault. Error. By law, banks only need to keep a small fraction, usually 10% or even 0% during special periods, and they are allowed to lend out the rest. Look at this logical chain. You deposit $1,000. The bank keeps $100 and lends $900 to your neighbor to buy a MacBook on installments. The computer seller receives $900 and deposits it back into their bank. That bank then keeps $90 and lends $810 to someone else. From just the original $1,000, the system has created thousands of additional dollars in debt money circulating in the economy. This is where inflation originates. Money is created from debt. When debt grows faster than labor productivity, we have too much money chasing too few goods. That is when inflation explodes. In the US, the Fed is designed as an agency independent of the government. However, if we observe how cash flow operates during periods of massive spending such as wars, recessions, or emergency bailout packages, we see a structural coordination mechanism between fiscal policy and monetary policy. When the government needs money to fund spending that exceeds tax revenue, the U.S. Treasury issues Treasury bonds. In essence, these are debt instruments. The government receives money today and pledges to repay it in the future with interest. These bonds are sold to the market and are typically purchased by large banks, investment funds, and financial institutions. In the next step, the Fed can intervene through open market operations. When the Fed repurchases bonds from banks, they do not use taxpayers' money. Instead, they create new bank reserves in the form of digital money within the system. As a result, the Fed's balance sheet expands, liquidity in the financial system increases, and the amount of money circulating in the economy is further injected. It is important to understand that this is not a secret or illegal act. This is a standard mechanism in the modern fiat money system. However, when this process occurs on a large scale and for a long duration, especially during quantitative easing (QE) programs, it can increase the money supply faster than the real growth rate of the economy, thereby creating inflationary pressure. Therefore, the issue does not lie in some conspiracy, but in how the system structure allows the government to fund spending through the bond market and allows the Fed to support liquidity when necessary. When these two policy streams intersect over a long period, inflation can become a natural consequence of that process. This is a closed loop. The government has money to spend without needing to raise taxes immediately. Banks profit from transaction fees, and you receive inflation. When the Fed buys bonds, they inject liquidity directly into the system. The M2 money supply, total money in circulation, swells. This is the act of diluting the value of every dollar you hold. It is like adding a gallon of water to a cup of concentrated coffee. The volume of liquid increases, but the flavor and true value are lost. In the modern fiat money system, the most critical tool for controlling inflation is the federal funds rate, the interest rate at which commercial banks lend to each other overnight. This is the central adjustment knob of monetary policy. When the Fed lowers interest rates to a minimum, the cost of borrowing drops sharply. Businesses are incentivized to expand production, invest in facilities, and hire more labor. Consumers can easily access credit to buy homes, cars, or increase their spending. Cheap credit causes demand to rise rapidly across the entire economy. If the growth of demand outpaces actual production capacity, especially when global supply chains are constrained, prices face upward pressure. This is the fundamental mechanism of the cheap money phase. Conversely, when the Fed raises interest rates, borrowing costs become more expensive. Mortgage rates rise, consumer credit shrinks, and businesses think twice before making new investments. The pace of spending slows down. As demand cools, inflationary pressure is gradually reined in. However, this process is not free. Economic growth slows, unemployment may rise, and the risk of recession emerges. This is always the trade-off between price stability and growth. A common point of debate is how inflation is measured. The CPI, Consumer Price Index, reflects the average price level of a basket of goods representative of household consumption. Beside the headline CPI, there is core CPI, which excludes food and energy because these two groups are highly volatile in the short term. This exclusion is not meant to hide information, but to help policymakers see the underlying inflation trend instead of being distracted by temporary shocks like oil prices or agricultural cycles. However, for the public, food and energy are essential daily costs. Therefore, a gap can exist between official inflation and the actual perception of consumers. Furthermore, the CPI calculation methodology has been adjusted many times over the decades, including changes in consumption weights and product substitution methods. Some critics argue that if the formulas from the 1980s were applied today, current inflation rates might be higher than the reported figures. However, it should also be noted that measurement methods are constantly updated to reflect changing consumer behavior over time. Thus, rather than viewing this as a conspiracy, it is more logical to understand that inflation is a phenomenon measured in various ways, each serving a specific analytical purpose. The gap between official data and personal perception is real, but it reflects the complexity of economic measurement rather than mere concealment. So, after dissecting this entire machine, what do we realize? Inflation is not a technical glitch, it is a managed debt cycle. The Fed and the government do not manage the economy to help you get rich, they manage it to keep the machine from stopping. They turn the interest rate knobs, they inject liquidity, they adjust the CPI, all to ensure one single thing: circulation. But within that circulation process, there is a truth they never write in textbooks. Every time this machine starts a new cycle, the gap between those holding cash and those holding assets widens by another notch. This financial system was not designed to protect your past labor. It was designed to force you to bet your labor on the future. If you choose to stay out of the game, choosing to save the dollars you sweated for, then this very system will turn your hard work into ashes through the silent blood-sucking mechanism we just analyzed. This is a game where the rules are already written for bankers and politicians. You cannot change the rules, but you are forced to understand them. Because if you don't understand why your money is disappearing, you will spend your entire life working for a system whose ultimate goal is to make your efforts cheaper every day. But theory is one thing. Historical reality is a much more brutal story. To see more clearly how this octopus tentacle has squeezed the pockets of the American people throughout the ages, we need to look back at the past. Let's travel back in time to the 1970s, a place where inflation was no longer an abstract concept, but a living nightmare present at every gas station in New York. History is never just dead numbers. It consists of expensive lessons paid for by the sweat and tears of millions of workers. To understand why your wallet in New York is emptying so fast today, we must travel back to the moment when the world's rules of the game were changed forever. Before 1971, the US dollar was a tangible substance. Under the Bretton Woods system, $35 was equivalent to 1 ounce of gold. It was the iron chain that locked the hands of politicians, forcing them not to print money indiscriminately. But the war in Vietnam and massive social welfare programs pushed the US budget into a corner. When the amount of dollars printed was many times the gold reserves, the world began to doubt. On August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon went on television and announced the US would temporarily suspend the conversion of dollars into gold. With just one statement, currency transformed from an asset into a promise. The monster of inflation was officially unchained. After 1971, when the US terminated the convertibility of the USD into gold and the Bretton Woods system officially collapsed, the M2 money supply began to expand significantly faster than in previous periods. Consequently, the 1970s became one of the most volatile economic eras in modern US history. Economists call this stagflation, a state of stagnant growth coupled with high inflation, a phenomenon that defied the traditional economic models of that time. The data illustrates the severity of this period. In 1974, inflation exceeded 11%. By 1980, the CPY peaked at 14.8%. Within a single decade, the purchasing power of the dollar plummeted. A $10,000 savings account in 1970, if not invested profitably, would have seen its real value drop to less than half by 1980. Persistent high inflation eroded fixed incomes, decimated cash assets, and created widespread social instability. The causes of this era were not limited to the money supply. They also involved the oil shocks of 1973 to 1979, fiscal spending on war and social welfare, and inflation expectations becoming deeply embedded in economic behavior. However, one clear consequence was that the real value of government debt decreased over time. During periods of high inflation, nominal debt is repaid with currency that has lower purchasing power than before. This created a dual impact. The government reduced its debt burden in real terms, while the public, especially those on fixed incomes, faced skyrocketing costs of living, from gasoline to food, as long lines at gas stations became the defining image of that era. In the chaotic landscape of the 1970s, not everyone suffered passively. Investors who understood the mechanics of currency acted very differently. They did not hold cash long-term because as inflation surged, fiat currency continuously lost its purchasing power. Instead, they rotated into scarce assets, specifically gold and commodities. Ray Dalio, who later became one of the most renowned macro investors, was a prime example of this mindset. Recognizing the rapid dilution of currency, he bet on commodities and gold. Market movements reflected this logic as gold prices skyrocketed from $35 per ounce in 1971 to approximately $850 in 1980, a nearly 24-fold increase in less than a decade. Simultaneously, real estate became a leveraged, safe haven. Investors who grasped the mechanics of inflation took out long-term fixed-rate loans during periods when nominal interest rates were still low. As inflation climbed into the double digits, the real value of the debt decreased over time, while asset prices, especially housing, rose in line with the general price level. If inflation sat at 14% while the cost of borrowing was only 6 to 7%, the borrower was essentially repaying the debt with increasingly devalued currency. In such an environment, leverage was no longer pure risk. It became a tool for transferring value from lenders to owners of tangible assets. But do not confuse intelligent greed with blind recklessness. Debt is only gold if you know how to manage it. The ultra-wealthy of the 1970s survived because they used debt to acquire cash flow assets. They never borrowed for consumption. In contrast, the American middle class often fell into the consumer debt trap. When inflation surged, the Fed was forced to push interest rates to insane levels, peaking at 20% in 1981 under Paul Volcker to kill the inflation monster. At this point, those who borrowed to buy cars or luxury goods with floating interest rates were completely crushed. Their cash flow snapped, and their assets were repossessed. They spent their entire lives working not to build wealth, but to pay interest on the mistakes of their past. The history of inflation in the United States is not a story of bad luck. It is a testament to a law of survival. In a monetary system with no backing, standing still is committing suicide. Inflation is neither good nor bad. It is a test of risk management capabilities. The wealthiest people are not necessarily those who work the hardest, but those who best understand the debt cycle and know how to own things that a printing press cannot recreate. So, where do you stand? Are you holding a stack of cash and hoping the government will control everything? Or are you learning the way of the top 1%, turning inflation into the wind that pushes your asset sales further? Remember, the gap between the rich and the poor does not just lie in the amount of money you have. It begins with the gap in perception. There is a paradox unfolding right in the heart of America. The working class has never worked harder, yet they have never felt more financially insecure. Why? Because in an inflationary system, mere hard work is no longer a master key. If you only know how to trade time for money and keep that money in the form of cash, you are playing a game where the house has been rigged from the very beginning. The group that loses the most consists of the most honest and disciplined savers, those who believe in the old advice, put your money in the bank and earn interest. Look at the truth. If inflation is 7% but the savings interest rate is only 3%, you aren't earning any money. You are losing 4% of your purchasing power every year. The bank takes your money at a dirt-cheap price to lend it to the wealthy, who then invest it in assets. In other words, savers are inadvertently subsidizing the wealth of the upper class. In the world of fiat money, saving is not a virtue, it is a strategic error. Why is the working class in the Bronx or Queens exhausted? It is because of wage lag. When money is printed, commodity prices rise immediately, but your wages? It takes 6 months, a year, or even longer for companies to adjust salaries to compensate for depreciation. During that lag period, the real value of every hour of your labor has been stolen. You still do the same amount of work, you are just as tired, but your bowl of rice gets smaller and your rent gets higher. Inflation is a silent wage cut that requires no announcement from your boss. This is the most sophisticated part that the government does not tell you. When inflation rises, your nominal wage may increase slightly to compensate. However, as the figure on your paycheck grows, you are inadvertently pushed into a higher tax bracket. The result? You pay more taxes to the government, while the actual purchasing power of your remaining after-tax income is even lower than it was before the raise. The government does not need to increase tax rates, they only need to create inflation, and you will voluntarily hand over more money to them. For the wealthy, the price of eggs doubling is merely a grain of sand in the desert of their wealth. But for the bottom 50% of Americans, those who hold less than 3% of financial assets, inflation is a survival catastrophe. Because the majority of their income is spent on essentials, food, gasoline, and rent. These are precisely the items that experience the sharpest price increases during inflation. As the cost of survival rises, they are left without a single dollar to invest. They are trapped in a spiral, working to live and living to work. Inflation has completely neutralized their ability to accumulate wealth and move up the social ladder. So you see, inflation does not hit everyone equally. It is a brutal filter. It punishes those who trust in cash and those who rely solely on pure physical labor. Hard work is necessary, but in this era, it is only a basic requirement. If you do not equip yourself with knowledge about assets, if you do not understand how cash flow operates, then your hard work is merely enriching someone else. Do not take pride in being the most disciplined saver or working the longest hours. Ask yourself, do you own anything that the printing press cannot dilute? Because if not, you are on the losing side of the greatest wealth transfer in history. But do not be too pessimistic, because in the next chapter we will flip the script. Who are the ones smiling when inflation erupts, and how have they prepared to take it all in this game? Inflation is not a storm that sweeps everything away. It is a wealth filtration funnel. Look at how those at the top of the financial food chain harvest profits as prices escalate. The government is the biggest beneficiary because they are the biggest debtor. Look at the $34 trillion in U.S. national debt. If inflation is 10%, then in real terms, the government's debt has been discounted by 10%. They are repaying their debt with dollars that have much lower purchasing power than when they were borrowed. But the cleverest and most brutal part lies in bracket creep. When inflation pushes up commodity prices, your wages may increase slightly to compensate. However, tax brackets in the U.S. are not adjusted correspondingly in real time. The result, an increase in nominal wages, pushes you into a higher tax bracket. You pay more taxes to Washington while the actual purchasing power in your pocket is diminished. The government effectively has its debt erased while simultaneously collecting more taxes without having to sign a single decree to raise tax rates. It is a spectacular deception. This is the secret that Wall Street doesn't want you to know. Newly printed money never enters the economy evenly. It flows through primary dealers first. These players receive the freshest, most powerful capital before it has the chance to drive up consumer prices. They use that liquidity to accumulate assets, stocks, bonds, and commercial real estate. By the time that money reaches your hands in the form of wages or stimulus checks, its value has already been diluted by soaring prices at the supermarket and the gas station. The financial elite profit from this time gap. They buy at low valuations, and as inflation pushes asset prices to the moon, they are the ones holding them. You aren't just paying high prices for food, you are paying premium prices for the very assets they seized earlier using money that eroded your own. The third group consists of asset owners with pricing power. Look at the major food conglomerates or Manhattan real estate moguls. When inflation hits 10%, they don't just raise prices by 10%. They often hike them by 12% or more as a buffer. They own what you are forced to use: housing, energy for transportation, and food to eat. Since you cannot stop consuming these essentials, they easily shift the entire inflationary burden onto your shoulders, often increasing their profit margins in the process. Their wealth does not come from working harder, but from holding the choke points of survival. While the dollar evaporates, their ownership of these choke points becomes more valuable than ever. Many Americans often ask, why can't we go back to the 1950s, when a single father working could support an entire family and buy a house? Why do economic experts always talk about a 2% inflation target as the gold standard instead of 0%? The answer will force you to completely change how you view the world. Inflation is not a bug in the economy. It is a core feature designed to keep modern society from collapsing. The U.S. economy, from the government to its citizens, runs on one thing: debt. When the government borrows trillions of dollars, they never intend to repay that debt through actual labor. If inflation were 0%, that debt would remain forever and crush the national budget. But by creating inflation, the real value of that debt automatically evaporates over time. Inflation is a silent debt erasure mechanism that requires no declaration of bankruptcy. Without inflation, our debt-based financial system would implode instantly. This is not a bug. It is how they keep the ship from sinking by dumping the weight of debt onto the shoulders of those holding cash. Why is the Fed obsessed with the 2% figure? Imagine if your money maintained its value, 0% inflation, you would have a tendency to hoard it. When everyone stops consuming and stops investing while waiting for prices to drop, deflation, the lifeblood of the economy circulation, stops. Inflation is designed to make your money hot. It forces you to either spend it or invest it to seek returns that outperform the inflation rate. From a macro perspective, this is forced evolution. The system compels every individual and business to constantly innovate and race just to prevent their assets from being eroded. It is like a moving treadmill. You cannot stand still. You are forced to run, and that very race is what generates GDP and the growth we see in the headlines. Inflation is the system's whip to prevent the laziness of capital. Ultimately, inflation is a filter. It eliminates cash holders, the passive, and shifts power to asset owners and those who leverage debt, the active. The system needs industrious workers, and the best way to keep them working is to ensure their reward, wages, gradually loses value. This forces them back into the labor market every single day just to maintain their lifestyle. Inflation is the invisible thread that keeps the gears of society turning. It was not created to help you get rich, it was created to keep you busy. So, now that you know inflation is an unchangeable structure of this game, what will you do? Will you continue to complain about a bug that you cannot fix? Or will you start learning how to operate within the machine so that you don't become its fuel? In a structure where standing still is death, the only difference between a slave and a free man is the speed at which their perception evolves. After everything we have deconstructed, the truth about inflation lies in a brutal point of equilibrium. Objectively speaking, inflation is not the enemy of humanity, but it is not a friend of stability either. It is a governance tool. Without inflation, our modern economy built on massive layers of debt towers would collapse under its own weight. Inflation is the lubricant that keeps the gears of public debt, corporate debt, and consumption running without seizing up. It creates pressure, and that pressure forces society to evolve. But the price of that movement is placed on the shoulders of those who work the hardest, yet understand the rules of the game the least. Inflation is a silent wealth transfer, continuously filtering out those who stand still and granting power to those who dare to race. It does not care about morality, it only cares about the efficiency of the flow. You cannot ask this system to stop because stopping means collapse. You cannot escape it either because every breath of your consumption is tied to the dollar. So, instead of resentment toward a structure that has existed for over half a century, face the reality. This system is only cruel to those who are unprepared. It is the harshest survival test that each of us must participate in from the moment we receive our very first paycheck. We are living in an era where mere hard work is no longer enough to protect your future. Inflation has turned the world into a treadmill with no stop button. You are forced to run faster every day just to stay in the same place, or run incredibly fast to break ahead. But ask yourself one final thing. If the goal of inflation is to force you to work and contribute relentlessly until the end of your life, then is the true definition of financial freedom having a lot of money? Or is it finding a way to escape the spiral that this system has designed for you?